Good night. It's Joyful Christian Hermit. There's many things I could discuss. I brought up various topics in the last couple of videos. And one, I next wanted to talk about the energy, the literal energy in pain, and that pain utilized in prayer for God to utilize for others, for anyone, for any of God's uses. Then I had brought up listening to God, listening to Christ, putting our heads on his heart to listen. Actually, listen to Christ's heart. Any words that he has to say to us. Meaningful. And I had spoken also of the suffering of a holiday such as Christmas, the suffering that many of us go through for various reasons. Loneliness, having gone through trauma, having loved ones not wanting to connect for various reasons. Many we don't know. But or for not having many relatives, or unable to get out, or not able to connect with people for various reasons. So I had been mentioning that Christmas, for some, can be very painful. Lonely, feelings of rejection, or just sorrow. And not the rejective, things like that. And how we get through prayer, through love, through forgiveness, trying not to make assumptions of the other people, trying to be very compassionate and understanding, which takes us back sometimes. And it's hard to go back, especially if it's an adult dealing with another adult who had been a child, and how their perspective will not be the same. It can't possibly be. And really compassion and understanding the wisdom of stopping ourselves from making assumptions, and after a while also keep trying to ask forgiveness or connect, keep the connection going. We can try, but if we suspect, or it could be a possibility that the other person is doesn't want to, for whatever reason, is triggered by their own memories that were painful. And then in this last video, the previous video, I went into a lot of why in my own life, some of the suffering of the past, in a relationship, in my marriage. And that brought up a question from a viewer who couldn't understand how could someone say they loved someone and be married to them and stay with someone who would treat them like that. Even commented, later when I did a lot of explaining, and I took it down. I just don't want to get into all that detail, but I did for this person. I consider her a dear friend. And she honestly didn't understand. But there's increasing information about sociopaths and narcissists and even psychopaths and those with borderline personality. But the sociopaths are very tricky. And they go more undetected. Obviously, you don't know. They are very adept. They are very sick. And they don't recognize themselves. It becomes a big game to them, in fact, what they are doing. They come to believe their lies and their stories, and they love the intrigue. Usually they're high energy people, very intelligent. You have to be intelligent to keep all these different lies going. They are usually very philanderers, womanizers, or manizers. Usually narcissistic also, insecure, and so they have puffed up with narcissism. At some point in time, the devil has gotten into them, moved in on their sickness and on their giving over to lying and cheating and their egos, and the person themselves don't recognize. They know, though, at a certain level, but it becomes such a part of their life that they become inured to it. And it becomes their way of life. And they really thrive on fooling someone, fooling their wives or their husbands. There's women sociopaths also, narcissistic sociopaths. And then the psychopaths can be found out a little more readily. Usually they will do more violent and crazy things. They're not as careful. They become so far gone, and they flip out and into extremism. And they're the ones that end up doing murders, but sociopaths can. And but usually not. They're successful people, hard workers or whatever, charming, very charming, fun to be around, great conversationalists. They're con artists also. And it's very subtle. You don't recognize it. Goes over time. They go after someone. He went after me, and as far as to date, and swept me off my feet. Good times, lots of fun. A teacher. He was an elementary school teacher. And my aunt knew of him. My cousin had gone to high school with him, said he knew him. But you don't really know them. You'd have to be very, very close and over a long period of time. And I think have a background in clinical psychology at this point. But now, thanks to social media, there's lots out there now on people with disorders, all kinds of disorders. And narcissism is a big one, very big one. And sociopath goes with that. But, and it's ironic because one of our viewers who has sort of guided me and helped me with, things, he pointed out that one of my highest viewed videos of the past year or over a year was the one discussing the narcissistic sociopathic husband. And he said, you could, but I assume that when I assumed that people start watching my videos from the beginning and go through chronologically, because I've gone in chronological order. Up to now, I'm doing present moment things mostly, every now and then a flashback. But no, so, but he said, well, go ahead and repeat the ones that were very popular. But I really can't go back into all that. It's a horrific thing. And I realized that my daughter may, being around me or even talking to me on the phone now, thinking of me, may take her back. And maybe they take me back. I know when my son would start bullying on the phone, or I would call him out on something, and he would get angry. That's one thing. You don't poke at these people. That's a test. But when you're first with them, see, they control all that. Every now and then, like one time in our engagement period, I caught him in an obvious lie he had made. And I told him that you hadn't said that. That's not what you had said before. And my husband had, or fiance went into got really angry and said, if that's how you're going to act and be, then the engagement's off. And I was at my aunt and uncle's house. We were in the living room, and I thought, okay, this is it, But then my aunt talked to me, and she says, oh, this often happens before your wedding. It's going to be in about 6 weeks, 2 months, maybe it was 2 months away, the wedding. My mom back in the Midwest was doing all this work, getting everything ready. I had already started sewing my wedding dress. My aunt had donated all the fabric. She owned a tremendous fabric store. And invitations were being readied and all of this. And I hadn't gone back to a teaching job, which I did not want to go back to. Admittedly, I did not. I was substituting in California then, since I had reneged on the contract. In time, they had plenty of time to hire someone. But my aunt said these are typical spats, and, everyone has a breaking point, and, patch it back up and all this. And so I did. That was the only time I saw him have temper. But I don't like lying at all, and it was rather a big lie. It was over finances. He said his grandfather had died and that he was going to get, I think it said $7,000 that he was going to be getting. He had nothing saved up, but he had been paying off college loans. He was a hard worker. He was working a night job, plus he taught. He got his teaching job and was frugal, so it wasn't anything bad there. He said he'd been brought up Methodist and, was a churchgoer and all this. Well, that ended up not so. They had gone to the Methodist church, but his parents weren't regular churchgoers at all. And I think he had been baptized in a Methodist church, but as a baby or something. But after he left, he never went to church again. He doesn't go to church. That was, he said he'd been a youth minister. They make up things, but it's stuff that you wouldn't lie about, so you don't even second guess. But that because then when it came down to it, it was $1,000. And that's when I said, but you said was this or that. And I was buying the car that my parents let me use the last year of my college, buying it from them. And, it made a difference. It would have been handy because I had some savings because I always was working every summer and stuff. But my dad put us through college, his daughters, something he wanted to do. And I'm ever grateful. So I didn't have the college bills that my husband had, my fiance, but something like that. And then my aunt, and she's, really talked to me about that. And she's like, tell you've had a spat, both of you to patch it up. These things happen. Tensions get high before a wedding and all of that. But, and then he didn't do anything more. But after we were married, he was very careful. They're very slick. I don't know if they even recognize it in themselves, but it's quite an illness. They're sick people, very sick, and the devil has moved in with their sickness, and they do immoral things, multiple women or men, the lying, they believe it. I think they really believe it, but not totally, because they really erupt if they get caught, or if you confront them. And but it was quite a while, but it's a subtle. They do then a subtle thing where subtle bits of wearing you down and putting you down very subtly. You don't notice it, and you become less secure, less sure of yourself, more demeaned, and but you don't recognize that. But my parents would come visit. He would treat them so, and he treated me fine. I thought, seems so. He was hesitant about having children. I talked him into the first one. And he seemed excited about me and my aunt and uncle. And my best friend had come out with me for that summer, and she met my husband. They got married to my cousin, and her married, and they lived near, so we had all these family fun things. Everybody loved him, thought he was fun and good. One of the cousin's wives was very sharp and shrewd, and she later said she knew that he had a big ego. He's very egotistical, or thought a great deal of himself, but and didn't trust him. But who knows if she knew that well in advance or after the fact. It can be easy to say those things, but there were little signals, though, that I would get, and they were painful, they were hurtful. But the devil could work on me too, and sort of put in my mind, well, that's not such a big deal, and you learn to bypass some of those things, and you bear the hurt. But I just had little instincts of things. And also with this woman he had dated before me, that I found out he'd been engaged to her. But he had told me that he'd gone over that at Christmas after she left and went back to Germany. And she had gone to Sweden to get an abortion. She'd gotten pregnant by a boyfriend over there. And he said it just crushed him, and on and on. Well, it was his child that she aborted. And she had wanted him to marry her, and he wouldn't. So she had gone back home. But she sent him a letter. Maybe it was a couple of years later. We were married. We already had our baby, so it would have been 3 years later, 2.5 at least, 3 years. I think we had the baby about 2.5 to 3 years later, our first child. And we had a home then. We were doing well. We worked well together. We were a team, advancing. I'd have to explain a lot. I was the one that had more of the intelligence of doing things, but he wasn't. He was intelligent. I just had a different kind of intelligence, and I had my inner sight and inner senses, which I didn't recognize, but I could sense things that we should do. See, so it was an advantage. And so we did well, climbing the ladder, and he was a hard worker. So there were, I loved him, and I wasn't, even, and my best friend who was with me, and she says, oh, he'd make a great father. He's a school teacher, and he was an excellent school teacher. Parents liked him. Maybe some of the students didn't, as I found out a little later. Some of the boys didn't, but because he was a controlling person. They can be very controlling. But everyone was very encouraging, and there were other little things that would stand out, but then they would get smoothed over. But very cunning. very deceitful, very deceptive, very smooth. It's the devil, very evil. And they become more and more controlling, and then you're more invested, and they love the game they've got going and how they have fooled and tricked, and they keep going with that and see just how much they can get away with it. It's a big intrigue for a narcissistic sociopath. And afterwards, Dr. H, at one point, they had to haul him in and talk to him. And he says, how on earth did you get hooked up with this man? He said, not at all like you. And I said, well, and he wasn't all that good looking. He was handsome, but not, and I'd even told my best friend, I said, well, I won't have to worry about women all the time because I was better looking of the two by far. And but he wasn't unattractive at all. We made a very striking couple. I would hear that a lot, that when we'd walk in the door at a party or something, heads would turn. But he had a charisma. These sociopaths tend to. This Scott Peterson, in the United States, and he was in the news, he ended up killing his wife and unborn child, 9-month-old in the womb, or a 9th month in the womb, due in about a month, or 8 months in the womb. And they're very, he went into the sociopath, or psychopath, for the killing of that. But mine could, he got evil and vicious. And he didn't want me. He was tired of it because I was getting onto it, and he didn't have the control over me. But I had planned to keep the family together. I didn't know what the problem was I didn't know the diagnosis or what it meant or anything. You'd have to have been a psychologist to know that. But, and you have to know them too. They're clever. So that's the answer of how you can get hoodwinked and live with someone. And I suspected the PTO president, I suspected he was having an affair when I was pregnant with the second child. And he was the teachers union president. And I just suspected there was one. I actually suspected within the first year, but I buried that. But I see, and also I was very religious, from the Midwest, small town, sheltered, and I trusted, and I really believed in my vows. I did not believe in divorce. I believe you work through things. And but I think there was someone his first year, or after he'd started getting his administrative master's, to set himself up to become a principal. He was a very high achiever, so am I. We had a lot in common. But for evil. And he did not like my mysticism. I didn't know that was what it was called, but when he left, he did finally, the third time he left and stayed gone. He had left a letter then and said he never liked my mysticism. But I remember one night I had a vision. I didn't know it was called that, but a whoosh of air, cold air, came through the house. I thought the door had opened. The children were in bed. The one was an infant, and the other year and a half, a little over a year and a half, and maybe 22 months or something, not quite 2. And I saw this vision of some woman on the ground between cars in a parking lot, and my husband with some other women. But see, he was an elementary teacher and president of the teachers union. Most of them were women. This was in the in the early to mid 70s. It was mid to later 70s by then, and a lot of women teachers. So yes, he had been out to dinner with them, and somebody had fallen in the parking lot. um, and so when he got home, I said, "What happened?" I saw this. I saw this. In my mind, I could see it. Is that what happened? And he was freaked because, see, then it's like these priests. The priest, then they spread the word and they think that I can see into everything then. And those who are up to no good don't like it of anyone. So, even good priests, it's creepy for them, or good anyone. But it doesn't work like that. I'm shown what God wants to show me. And so he had a story for it, and I believed it. But other times I had feelings. And then he was cruel he did a cruel thing. He was laughing. He thought it was funny. But it was really malicious. Not the end of the world kind of thing. But I'm not going to get into all these details, but it was just dumb and thoughtless thing to do to me. When we were out, it was chilly and I got wet. He was rowing. I'll say we were rowing in this wild safari place. He had our little daughter beside him. He favored that first child a lot. Unhealthy, really, as I looked back later. At the time, you don't recognize. I was very pregnant with the second child. And I was sitting in the end of the boat, and he would row us, and just get me wet from these fountains. It was Christmas time. It was cold, gray and cold. And there I was, 8.5 months pregnant. And I would tell him to stop. And he would just laugh and go around again and are just, mean and passive aggressive. He started to do passive aggressive things. But then, well, can't you take a joke? I was just joking, it was, but you become in vulnerable positions then. You have a house, you have a mortgage. We were both in the same school district, but he would pressure then that I needed to work. But then at one point, I didn't want to work. After I had the second one, it was too much. I wanted to stay home with the children. And then we got I found this nursery school house we could buy, had a school behind. I could work with the director and the teachers and be at home with the children too. And we had great income from it. And I would plan the curriculum and work on the house to improve it. We increased the size of the school by having a couple classrooms in the house that I fixed up for that purpose, and went through and he liked doing all these things. He grew tired of it though. He would grow tired of things when he was going to start getting found out, like at a school or at a then he would apply, but say that he wanted to just get a new experience. And we would upgrade then. He got into principalships, and we'd move every 2 to 3 years, it seems. 3 years, easily, because he would keep going up the ladder. But not long. Our marriage wasn't even that long, all told. It seemed like such a long time. We lived life to the full. And, then I picked up on things and found out, but then I guess something in me said, don't confront directly. I did, but sideways kinds of confrontations, with humor or whatever. By that time, I knew he had a temper, but he would say some bizarre things that were very hurtful, and and also would make sort of ultimatums to me. And, if you want this marriage to stay together, after we had 2 children and I was pregnant with a third kind of thing, I'd gotten accepted to law school. I wanted to advance in something. I knew I wasn't good in the classroom. That was not my natural place to be. And he did not like that at all, for me to be in law school, to be a lawyer. But he agreed, a doctorate in education administration. And because he liked that idea, he wanted the prestige. And as my minister told me, that he loved looking good with you on his arm, with me on his arm, and his beautiful blonde children. Loved that, and he liked going places with them so that he could show off and be this great dad. But I saw it as, well, how wonderful. I didn't see that he was performing for people. I thought he was just really enjoying his children. But then, he didn't particularly want to stay home and do things with them. But he did what he needed to do to play his game with me and with others. But he had these multiple lives going on at the same time that finally he admitted to. Not all, though. He couldn't even tell the truth. When he said he was going to tell the truth, he couldn't. But then when the gig is up, even when they want out, and I think my being maimed did it, my injury, and the fact that it wasn't as much fun fooling someone who was injured. And it wasn't fun since I wasn't letting him control anymore. I wasn't responding. I wasn't, he knew that I knew. So it ruined it for him. His intrigue, his game, the delight in fooling someone, fooling his wife. So, but he wanted out. He wanted the divorce, but yet he wanted to destroy me, because in their minds, and it becomes that I ruined his game. I ruined his fun, his intrigue. And so truly, the devil gets into people. If you ever think the devil isn't real, think again. All that deception, the lies. And in the one district we were in that I worked, and even though I was media center director and the 2 employees under me, why that no one told me. Even the babysitter for the little boy we had, the baby, she knew. They knew. I would go there at lunchtime and nurse him, and back to pick him up, the baby, nurse him, get home. I was doing it all. Well, my husband wanted me to work. He says that was part of the deal. That's what we agreed to. All these situations. So, and you just get into it, and it's horrible. It's a horrible thing. And then the hell you go through when they are trying to destroy you, when they want to destroy you. And that's their goal then, after you're away from them somewhat. You still have children. And I had wanted to have a very amicable divorce, but you don't have those with the sociopath, I found out. You just don't. So it's, they're not monsters. They've got the devil in them. So I don't want to talk about it again. And I realize that it comes back in a flash. It's a very painful thing. And for me, I don't think my eldest daughter can begin to grasp when she had told me a year and a half ago, I know about how her mother-in-law kept her divorce in a box. And I didn't. So my daughter was criticizing. And a big difference in the mother-in-law's husband and mine, her dad. I had a doozy. And my kids knew, but buried it after they were away from him, after we got away. Judge let us out. He had quite a outburst in court. My ex did. We were divorced by then. And I've explained that whole story. Nightly dreams, God telling me, take the children back to the Midwest, back to your hometown, every night until I sold the house and God knew that I would follow through, at least get through court. And even though it looked like, we weren't going to get out of state, and I was starting to doubt, because it didn't matter. I felt I was okay there, but I realized later I wasn't safe there at all. And God knew it, and He wanted me out, 2,200 miles away, and those children away. So God didn't send me back to earth to rear the children, to have me end up dead, murdered by someone that He'd hired, a grove worker or someone, so who couldn't be traced. So, or if they did, he wouldn't be connected to it. So, you just please do not ever think, oh my, that would never happen to me. There's been plenty of movies now in the last 15 years or 10 years especially of these situations. And Dr. H, when he says, how did you get hooked up with them? And I said, long story, but he says, you didn't know. He says, they're hard to figure. He says, even for a psychologist to figure. He said he was easy for me because they brought him in he was in trouble with some things he'd done. And he was in an uproar already. The devil was wild in their office, and these two psychologists talking with him. And they ran him through. And they laid it out, and they made it clear, and he knew he would lose his career if he didn't keep a real good line on himself regarding the children. So, but he was livid. The devil was on fire. Then, that was back then, but yeah, so you don't know. I mean, now, of course, I look back and I think, oh yeah, I wouldn't. But all this, everybody thinking, it was great. And he had older adult friends, these couples, men that he had driven. He worked nights at the LA Times, putting himself through college, industrious person. They were nice people. These other older men that he drove with back and forth into LA. So, got his master's in ed administration. He had an affair with a woman with that, but had met a good friend, a male friend in his class, and they had us to their condo, he and his wife, and we had wonderful social life. And I met people then, women, and we'd get together. We'd have great parties, fun parties. He loved doing games with groups, and he was a natural teacher. I think that's where my second daughter gets her teaching gift. And from my mother. My mother was a natural teacher, had a gift. So that's how it is. Please do not judge or even question these situations, because you think never for you, but You don't know. You don't know. The devil is very tricky. I've been tricked by the devil many times in my life. Even as a Catholic, after I knew more, even one time I was told something, warned, and I got tricked. So that's all I'm going to say about it. You can look it up. Look up these personality disorders. I've mentioned it before. Brace yourself. Learn. Become knowledgeable. There's all kinds out there. OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's another one that can slide by. And you can tell, well, that's a little extreme, that's a little much. You think it's not that harmful. It can get very harmful, especially for the person living with someone with OCPD. Any personality disorder is a disorder because the personality traits have gotten way out of whack, and to whatever degree out of whack, and makes relating very difficult, and in some cases dangerous, and horribly painful. So, and yes, I mean, just what I feel for what my children were put through. Of course, I blamed myself. And you can look back and see different signals that I should have just been right out of there. But then you think about your vows, your wedding vows, and you don't have anything really concrete. It took him admitting that I thought, well, adultery, that Jesus says. But later I realized, well, there's all kinds of adultery. It isn't just sexual adultery. So to adulterate another person can be in other ways than sexual infidelity. So Jesus, and if he wasn't physically abusive, but he was going to become that. He was on that verge. And as I said, he was way too rough in a over-punishing our eldest daughter. She was being stubborn about something, and he shook her, and I said, stop. And, but then later on, he kicked and repeatedly kicked and beat his stepson. I've talked about that in a video too, and that he eventually married the woman. It was his teacher. He's always having affairs with teachers, different people. Didn't matter who, really. He even had an affair with his first combo principal superintendency. And he had an affair with one of the school board members' wives. And he was terminated after the first year. But he had a 2-year contract, and legally they had to pay him. The second year, he got a free $200,000. Plus then, it's called the Dance of the Lemons in education. They give them a good recommendation just to get rid of them. Move them on. Dance of the Lemons. He got into another district and made like over $400,000 that year. Got another. After that, he moved out of state then with this woman and her 3 children, those poor children. Honestly, but she fell for it and she stayed with it. She had money, so I think she had a little more sway. She had quite a bit of her own money, and she was healthy and she taught and could work. He had certain things that he wanted. And I wasn't going to be able to, obviously, but no. Anyway, it's, and I've mentioned how her children, as adults, don't see him at all and never go to visit. And the mother, if she wants to see them, she has to go to them. And I don't know if all 3 of those children even allow her to come. Don't know. But I don't ask. If the one daughter now and then will say something, but It has worried me horribly that my kids would even visit and take grandchildren. He doesn't have a good sense of control or think he's abnormal. Duh. But even in normal things, how he would react. Like with my grandson, I talked about that. That was bizarre. The middle of the night thing, and not calling EMS, not waking up my daughter who was there, not going into the room and shaking her shoulder, wake up, your son's having some kind of a seizure. So he doesn't, I don't know, unless that was a big lie, or started out with a little bit, but he made it into a big thing. But then he told his son and our other daughter, our son and our other daughter, called them long distance and gossiped about the grandson, and then said derogatory things about the daughter, said that he had told her, but that she didn't care. That they had encouraged her to take him to the hospital the next morning and get him checked out, but that she didn't care, wasn't going to. He had never told her what had happened in the night. Maybe it didn't to that extent at all. Who knows? But God. Sick, and evil. Sick and evil together are bad combinations. So, I just can't go back there. It's nightmare after. It's just, there's no point. So I'm going to title it something, and people can come to this and hear a little bit more about narcissistic sociopaths and how you don't know, because I'm just not going to discuss it anymore. Hopefully. I know I get triggered easily, but it's negative. There's nothing I can do. But even for him, I used to pray and pray. My mother finally said, stop praying for him. God has heard your prayers. He's sick and he's evil. He had my parents fooled. They couldn't hardly believe it until he went off at my mother. After he'd left, he came back, dropped off the kids or something. I don't know what. Something like that, or had to pick them up for visitation, and really tore into my mother, scared her to pieces. And ironically, it was just after she had sort of given me the what for putting up with him. And it gets to a point where you sort of innately know, and you avoid confrontation then. And you don't recognize that you're doing it. It's a self-preservation mode. And probably why I got into getting my doctorate and innately, preparing so I would have income and be doing a job that I would prefer and be better at than classroom. So, but God didn't want me. He wanted me totally for himself. And I probably wouldn't have fit in as an administrator either, because some people sense I'm spiritually different. It's okay. This is my work, suffering, praying, and teaching you guys. Here's another topic I'll touch on. Somebody left a lot of comments the other day. Either they took it down or YouTube took them down because they were getting really sort of unkind, not sort of, very. But one of them was, saying how terrible it was, saying I'm a victim soul, said I was boasting about it. It's nothing you can boast about with it. It's suffering. I do break these human made-up taboos of silence about topics in the Catholic Church. I think that those taboos developed in the Middle Ages. If no one talks about it and mentions it and teaches about these things, other people won't know. and or won't know that they can offer themselves if they have a lot, or that God may have chosen them. And suffering may be a big part of their life because God has a different view of suffering than we humans do. It's not a horrible thing to God. It's there's energy to it. Love and suffering coexist together. Love to suffer, suffer to love. It's not the horror. It's painful, yes, and we don't want it. And God wants us to get well if that's what we're to be doing and if it's feasible. But if we have something that isn't going to get well, barring a miracle from God, like arachnoiditis, there's no cure for it, even though some doctor online was trying to say he had found some remedies that would cure it. No, he just was he was sort of like a snake oil salesman type, and hoping and wanting to be important. He was elderly and wanted to be the one to have some cure for arachnoiditis, I guess. But no, I think he's deceased now. But no, I think I don't want people to have a life like I've had as a Catholic, with even all that hush hush about the ecstasies. It caused me injuries, unnecessary. Educate people. Educate them. No one's trying to make themselves out as anything. I certainly wasn't. I'm not. It's great. It's painful to be a victim soul, but it's a job. It's a work. It's a vocation, like other vocations. And offer it to God. Offer the pain. Offer the suffering for Him to utilize. Offer it in prayer. For others, there's power in prayer and power in pain prayer. So that's my stance on it. And I feel like I can have that stance because I've been put through the mill. I'd say hell. It's more like hell I've been put through. And all this silence, and no one's going to learn that way. And how to treat people who are spiritually different too. No one's going to learn unless someone expresses what it's like to be persecuted in ways that isn't going to do them any good at judgment, to mistreat other people. And to understand victim soul is a good thing. And that there's different levels of victim soul. So that's in my blogs, and I've talked about it some in videos. So anyway, but no, I'm not boasting about things. But yes, I am breaking taboos, the silence. No one's to talk about these things. And I guess some people think that. And I don't find anything in Scripture that says not to discuss spiritual life or spiritual matters or to teach them. God told me I was to teach. Teach men and women to help them stabilize their emotional and spiritual lives and to grow in that. Share my life. That's what I'm doing. Take it or leave it. And I've shared now about how you can get hoodwinked. And a big flaw of mine was I should not have married as soon as I did. Should have insisted on a longer engagement. That I was in love and young and thought I knew what I was doing. And in a way, there was no reason to wait. We really hit it off. Other than I probably would have run into more lies. And then his eruptions. And then I would have cleared out. But you can't go back and beat yourself up over it. What good is that either? Love, forgive, love, pray, love, and forgive also yourselves. Okay, this is going to be a long one also. God bless His real presence in us. Maybe too long.